In 1637, a single tulip bulb could buy a mansion. This was the Dutch Golden Age, when milkmaids wore gold jewelry, sailors mapped the globe, and Amsterdam became the world's first modern city. But how did a nation smaller than West Virginia become the richest on Earth? The answer involves herring, slavery, and the first corporate takeover of a government. This is how the Dutch conquered money. The Dutch miracle, glory in the shadows of the sea. In a world gripped by war and empires clawing for dominance, a small republic carved from the marshes of northern Europe stunned the world. From 1588 to 1672, the Dutch Republic rose like a tempest, turning the tide of history in what some would later call the Dutch miracle. Their ships, sharp as blades and swift as shadows, ruled the oceans, from the spice-scented ports of Asia to the sugar-soaked shores of the Americas. Science flourished, art bloomed with haunting realism, and Amsterdam glowed like a lighthouse of reason in a stormy world. It was a golden era painted in Rembrandt's light and Vermeer's stillness. But behind the splendor lay chains, the brutal truths of conquest and the Atlantic slave trade, veiled in the sails of the Dutch East and West India Companies. As power-hungry neighbors closed in and the rampjar, the year of disaster, struck, the miracle began to fade. Today, the glory still glimmers in canvas and science, but its legacy remains tangled in triumph and tragedy as the Dutch Golden Age asks not just to be remembered, but to be reckoned with. Forged in rebellion, the birth of a republic. It began with defiance, a spark of rebellion in 1568 as 7 proud provinces turned against the might of Philip II of Spain. What followed was not just a war, but a relentless struggle for identity, for faith, for freedom, the 80 Years' War. As Spanish forces surged through the Low Countries, hope flickered. Antwerp, once the jewel of European trade, fell after a brutal siege, but the North would not yield. In the shadow of ruin, the United Provinces, modern-day Netherlands, held firm, their spirit unbroken. Through fire and blood, they endured even as Europe roared in its own conflicts. The Peace of Westphalia in 1648 did more than end a war. It sealed the dream of independence, carved from centuries of resistance. A republic was born not with a royal decree, but with grit, sacrifice, and the unwavering belief that a people could shape their own destiny. Exiles of faith, architects of empire. When the Protestant heart of the South was silenced under the weight of Habsburg rule, thousands fled, not in retreat, but in quiet defiance. Forced to abandon their homes in Bruges, Ghent, and Antwerp after the fall of 1585, these skilled craftsmen, merchants, and visionaries journeyed north, carrying with them more than belongings. They brought ideas, ambition, and a fierce devotion to liberty of belief. In Amsterdam, once a modest harbor, their exile sparked transformation. By 1630, the city pulsed with global trade and innovation, welcoming fellow seekers of refuge, Sephardi Jews escaping the Inquisition, Huguenots fleeing France, and even the Pilgrim Fathers on their way to a new world. This gathering of the displaced didn't just build a port, they forged a powerhouse. With Calvinist discipline and an unmatched literacy rate, the Dutch turned hardship into opportunity, flooding Europe with ships, capital, and vision. Their story is one of forced flight turned golden triumph, a testament to how exile, when met with resilience, can give rise to empire. Empire's shadow, the dark side of Dutch glory. Beneath the golden sails of Dutch prosperity lay shadows long and deep. As the Dutch East and West India Companies carved global trade routes and amassed staggering wealth, their ships didn't just carry spices, sugar, and goods, they carried chains. While Amsterdam banks swelled and the Republic basked in its maritime triumphs, whole nations groaned under its ambition. On the Banda Islands, nearly an entire population was slaughtered for nutmeg. In Brazil and the Caribbean, enslaved Africans, over 500,000, were torn from their homelands, dying by the thousands in the holds of Dutch ships. Even in Batavia, where the riches of Asia were counted, half the population lived in bondage. Though the Dutch built an empire that dazzled Europe with its art, science, and commerce, that brilliance came at a brutal cost. For every gilded painting and triumphant fleet, there was a cry silenced across oceans. This was the paradox of the Dutch Golden Age. an age as much about conquest and cruelty as it was about enlightenment. Whispers through Dejima, when the West met the East. In the quiet bay of Nagasaki, on a man-made island called Dejima, a strange dance unfolded, one of silence, science, and secrets. From 1640 to 1854, the Dutch held a fragile monopoly as Japan's only tether to the Western world. While other nations were shut out by the shogun's decree, Dutch ships alone bridged two civilizations. They brought not armies, but books, barometers, and the bright sparks of electricity. Here, amid porcelain and tribute, science passed hand to hand. Rengaku, or Dutch learning, took root in Japanese minds. Through translated texts and whispered lessons, the Dutch ignited quiet revolutions in medicine, astronomy, and mechanics. In an age when East and West barely spoke, Amsterdam's traders became unlikely tutors, and Dejima became more than a port. It became a keyhole through which Japan peered into the future. Masters of the trade winds, the Dutch Empire's global reach. In the 17th century, the Low Countries became the beating heart of European commerce, their strategic position between East and West, North and South, turning them into a vibrant crossroads of global trade. Dutch ships, sleek and numerous, filled the seas as they carried wine from France and Portugal to the Baltic and returned with grain for the Mediterranean. The Rhine River connected them to the vast markets of Germany, while their fleet dominated trade routes stretching to the nascent English colonies in North America. By the 1680s, nearly 1,000 Dutch ships a year entered the Baltic, breathing life into markets once controlled by the Hanseatic League. With the end of the war with Spain in 1648, Dutch merchants flourished, their empire of trade stretching far beyond Europe's borders, weaving a web of wealth and influence that spanned continents. The dark side of glory, rethinking the Dutch Golden Age. The term Dutch Golden Age has faced growing scrutiny in the 21st century, as the shadows of colonialism and slavery loom over its celebrated history. During this period, Dutch traders and slavers were deeply involved in the Atlantic and Indian Ocean slave trades, enslaving around 1.7 million people from the 17th to 19th centuries. This painful chapter was largely hidden beneath the narrative of prosperity, with the term Golden Age often glorifying the successes of the few while erasing the suffering of the many. In 2019, the Amsterdam Museum made a bold move, deciding to stop using the phrase, with its artistic director Margriet Shavemaker arguing that it hides the colonial past of the Netherlands. Her stance sparked backlash from political figures, including Dutch Prime Minister Mark Rutte, but found support from activists like Quincy Garrio, who claimed that the term was fundamentally flawed. The debate continues, questioning whether history's golden moments can ever truly shine without acknowledging the dark truths that often lie beneath. The Dutch Golden Age proves that wealth isn't about size, it's about systems. Which other economic superpower should we explore next? Tell us in the comments. If you enjoyed this financial history lesson, help us grow, like, subscribe and hit the notification bell for more from History Love.